This is Our Changing State, Vote 2024. I'm Matthew Peddie. Abortion is a polarising issue, politically at least. Polls show that most Floridians support an amendment, a proposed amendment, that would enshrine the right to an abortion in Florida's constitution. But however you feel about the issue, if you're casting a ballot in Florida this November, you'll get a chance to have a say. Long before the constitutional amendment was an issue, a battle was raging across Florida's political landscape over abortion access, and a lot of that happened in just the past few years. Well, for more, here's WUSF's Stephanie Colombini. Stephanie, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The rules about abortion in Florida are a bit complicated. So what's allowed today and what isn't allowed?
Yeah, so as of May 1st, a 6-week ban on abortions is in place. So meaning when a person is 6 weeks pregnant, that's starting from the date of their last period, they can no longer access an abortion legally in Florida. There are some exceptions to that, up to 15 weeks of pregnancy for a survivor of rape, incest, or human trafficking, provided that person provides documentation of the assault. And also there are exceptions for fatal fetal abnormalities up until the third trimester. So the first 2 trimesters, you can do that if a doctors verify that there's an abnormality. And then also really up until the last minute for mothers or the pregnant person to protect their life if they're in serious danger. And that doesn't count for psychological danger, but physical harm. If doctors certify that it's necessary to protect the life, then they will do that. Now,
the 6-week ban hasn't actually been in effect for that long, so have some of these exceptions been tested in real life, so to speak, in Florida? Like, have doctors been able to see how they play out and whether these exceptions are actually kind of valid or whether they work?
I've heard from some doctors that it's not enough. It's still really murky. The state did, provide some clarity shortly after the ban went into effect about some of the health conditions that, say, would qualify for the exception, like an ectopic pregnancy or if your water breaks early. There are some situations they outlined, but not enough. And there's kind of some murky areas where you could say as a doctor, I anticipate this patient is at high risk of having, a serious health problem, but she isn't yet. She's healthy today, but in a month from now may not be. And so it might be in her best interest to terminate the pregnancy, but I can't. And so there are still doctors having to turn patients away. I can't say definitively how well the rape and incest exception is working. I'm sure it is for some people, but I've heard it's really difficult because, not every person who does survive an assault like that is able to go to law enforcement, say, to get, a restraining order or report it to the hospital and get a medical record because there's safety concerns or, there's trauma they're still processing or they're, in an abusive situation. So that one I know can be really difficult for people to follow through on.
Now, this is all quite new. These new restrictions haven't been around that long, as we've said. So before 2022, what did Florida law say about legal access to an abortion?
It pretty much followed the standard most of the United States was under with Roe versus Wade, which, for 50 years established federal protections for abortion. And so it was pretty much legal here through viability, which is around 23, 24 weeks of the fetus. And so, that was what we saw for a long time. After 2022, that changed when the Dobbs decision, overturned Roe versus Wade, when the Supreme Court did that. Then a 15-week ban that the state had passed earlier in the year was able to go into effect.
Right. And so how did Florida go from that to what we have now in the state of Florida? Like, how did these restrictions roll out?
Yeah, Dobbs was huge, but the state had already been working on this. Like I mentioned, the 15-week ban had passed, but the state was really kind of hinging everything on the Dobbs decision because that court case involved a 15-week abortion ban in Mississippi, very similar to what Florida was trying to implement. And so it was kind of like everybody's watching to see, if the court allows that 15-week ban to stand, then ours will go into effect. And that's what happened in the summer of 2022. And so we had a 15-week ban in place. It was quickly challenged in court, and actually a judge had struck it down and said, issued an injunction saying that Florida's state constitution in the past, over previous decades, other court cases had said that this constitution, a privacy clause that was in our state constitution, protected abortion access. It doesn't explicitly say that, but legal precedent had said it did. And so this judge had said he agreed that this was probably an unconstitutional law, but the state appealed, and so that triggered an automatic stay, meaning the 15-week ban was allowed to go into effect while the court case was underway, and it took a really long time for this one to get resolved. Mm-hmm. And so during that time, in 2023, that's when the state passed the 6-week ban. But again, it was hinging on the 15-week case. It's all kind of confusing legal drama, but it was, until this spring was when finally that 15-week ban case was resolved. The Florida Supreme Court decided that the privacy clause was not efficient, did not protect abortion access. And by doing that, by upholding the 15-week ban, then the law we had already passed establishing the 6-week ban was allowed to go into effect. So we had a 30-day window to prepare, and May 1st, here we are.
What's your sense from talking to providers, people who provide this kind of care to people in Florida or from other states seeking, abortion? What's the awareness level of the 6-week ban and what it entails?
It's not great. I recently did a story about KFF did a survey of Floridians to see, where they stood on abortion rights and what their awareness was. And about a third of respondents didn't know the legal status of abortion. A lot of people knew there were restrictions in place. Some thought it might be entirely illegal. Some people weren't sure if it was still 15 weeks. So there's still a lot of uncertainty about the public knowing what they can access. And there was also a lot of uncertainty about how to get an abortion. About a third of respondents said, I wouldn't know if I needed an abortion tomorrow, where to go and how to get one and whether I could legally get one. So there's definitely a lack of awareness. I've talked to, doctors and people who work for abortion funds. These are groups that help people pay for abortions. So people will reach out to them needing help, not knowing that a 6-week ban was in place, not realizing they were even pregnant until 6 weeks, and then having to travel out of state for care or take other measures to get an abortion, say, online, getting medication. And so, there's a lot of people in the public who aren't fully aware of what's going on.
And it sounds from what you were saying earlier that healthcare providers themselves, the doctors, are also a little bit unsure about what their kind of legal situation might be if they're providing this care in certain circumstances. Absolutely.
So sometimes they're having to turn people away because they're just not quite sure. So people are doing their best to help folks, either, again, travel out of state or get medication abortion online. There are some other states that have, widespread access to abortion that have passed what are known as shield laws. And basically it's the state saying, we will kind of help shield doctors in our state who might prescribe abortion online through telemedicine to somebody in a banned state. We will kind of do our best to help them get shielded from prosecution if, say, Florida or another state with a ban went after that doctor. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing that happen. We're seeing people travel. And there are folks who are still getting abortion. We're still seeing thousands every month. It's absolutely a decline from last year and previous years, but people are still getting in under those 6 weeks. I think people who are aware of the ban are on heightened alert, so they're taking pregnancy tests sooner, they're acting sooner. Unfortunately, that means some people are making decisions before they've really had a chance to think it through. And I've heard doctors tell me they've treated patients who were frustrated and felt like they were rushed, but they felt like they had to get in under the 6 weeks if they were even remotely unsure about whether they could carry out the pregnancy. So there's a lot going on. It can be a really stressful situation for people who are pregnant right now, even those who desire the pregnancy, because they're just not sure they'll be able to get the health care they need if something goes wrong.
So it's a complicated situation from the medical point of view. It's also complicated legally, or it has been. Was it essentially the Dobbs decision that triggered the push for this amendment?
Yeah, I think so. Seeing how other states had abortion bans kick in pretty much immediately, and then Florida's 15-week ban went into effect, and knowing that the privacy clause was not protected. Obviously, we didn't get that decision definitively until this past spring, but, with the state appealing the 15-week ban and it going into effect, I think, supporters of abortion rights felt we need to act. We need to explicitly say in Florida's constitution that abortion is protected because we're not sure if this privacy clause will hold up. It didn't hold up. The Florida Supreme Court said that wasn't enough. So, now we have this constitutional amendment on the November ballot that asks people if they want to legalize abortion until viability. Again, that's about 23, 24, 25 weeks, or when a patient's healthcare provider deems it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. Now, is Florida alone in having an amendment on the ballot?
No, I think there's about 10 states right now that have ballot initiatives to protect abortion access. There's also an initiative in Nebraska to restrict abortion access. They have one for both sides. But there's a lot of movement on this, and we've seen that since Dobbs. States over the last few years have been passing things to enshrine abortion access in their state, and we've seen efforts to ban abortion get struck down because of ballot amendments failing. So I think there's been a lot of movement on this, and we'll continue to see that until there's really like a federal standard, if that ever comes back.
For voters, what do they need to know about what this amendment needs to pass?
60% of the vote. Florida has a pretty high threshold. Some of the states that have already passed ballot initiatives, they didn't have as high a threshold. It was like, even 51% say. Florida, it's got to be 60. And so, that's what voters need to know, whether they support it or they don't. And I've heard legal experts put it simply, where it's if you want Florida to return to a, Roe versus Wade state where abortion was accessible until, viability, vote yes. If you don't, if you agree with the 6-week ban or want restrictions further than that, you should vote no.
More lawsuits are expected too, right? So regardless of the outcome, what should a Floridian expect in that case? They
should expect complicated mess. I can't say exactly what will happen predicting the future, but this is not necessarily, the night of the election. Let's say it passes, and gets 60% of the vote. That doesn't mean tomorrow everybody can necessarily go get an abortion. I think there's going to be a lot of murkiness in terms of when exactly it's implemented. We've seen with past constitutional amendments, say like the medical marijuana one that passed a few years ago, or the one to return voting rights to people convicted of felonies. The state legislature gets involved. They might have, regulations and look for ways to kind of restrict this or implement it, or maybe provide clarity that people who oppose the amendment right now are raising concerns about, say, the definition of a health provider. That might be something the legislature looks at. And we could see lawsuits, if it passes, where people supporting abortion rights challenge existing laws besides the 6-week ban that restrict abortion right now. Right now, we have a 24-hour waiting period. So if you want an abortion, you have to see a provider in person and wait at least 24 hours after that consultation and ultrasound before you go back to get an abortion. That might be something that if voters pass this constitutional amendment, we'll go to court, or things about, restricting how minors access abortion. So there's a lot that could happen, and we'll have to wait and see.
That doesn't really seem to clear anything up, Stephanie. So for a voter, how can a voter break down this issue to make an informed decision?
Again, definitely do your research. Learn what's going on right now with Florida's abortion restrictions. Maybe talk to doctors, talk to people in your life who maybe are pregnant or have recently had a baby and what that experience was like. Keep an open mind. And you have to ask yourself, again, really, where do you stand on abortion? And not just where you personally stand, would you get an abortion, but just think about a pregnant person you might know who, for whatever reason, might need to access one. Do you want them to be able to do so after 6 weeks? Vote yes. If you're concerned and you don't, vote no. And that's kind of where we're at, I think. Do you want to go back to a Roe versus Wade state that we were in a couple years ago? Vote yes. If not, maybe vote no.
WUSF's Stephanie Colombini, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Our Changing State, Vote 2024. I'm Matthew Peddie. Thanks for watching. Our Changing State is a production of WUSF. Our executive producer is Gracyn Doctor. Scott Wachtler produces the podcast. Videos by Warren Buchholz and Chandler Balkcom, who also does our graphics. Engineering support from Blake Bass. Jackson Harpe composed our theme music. I'm Matthew Peddie. Thanks for listening.